Hello, and welcome back to Living Pages. Tonight, we'll go on a journey through several poems and culminate in a short story. I hope you're ready, because we're going to start with The Conqueror Worm by Edgar Allan Poe. Lo! 'Tis a gala night within the lonesome latter years, an angel throng bewinged, bedight, in veils and drowned in tears, sit in a theatre to see a play of hopes and fears, while the orchestra breathes fitfully the music of the spheres. Mimes in the form of God on high mutter and mumble low, and hither and thither fly, mere puppets they, who come and go, at bidding of vast formless things that shift the scenery to and fro, flapping from out their condor wings, invisible woe. That motley drama, oh, be sure, it shall not be forgot, with its phantom chased for evermore by a crowd that sees it not. Through a circle that ever returneth in to the self-same spot, and much of madness and more of sin, and horror the soul of the plot. But see amid the mimic root a crawling shape intrude, a blood-red thing that writhes from out the scenic solitude. It writhes with mortal pangs, the mimes become its food. Then seraphs sob at vermin fangs, and human gore imbue. Out are the lights, out all, and over each quivering form, the curtain, a funeral pall, comes down with the rush of a storm, while the angels, all pallid and wan, a firm, unveiling, uprising. The play is the tragedy of man, and its hero, the conqueror worm. Next, we have The Ghost's Petition by Christina Rossetti. There's a footstep coming. Look out and see. The leaves are falling, the wind is calling. No one cometh across the lea. There's a footstep coming. Oh, sister, look. The ripple flashes, the white foam dashes. No one cometh across the brook. But he promised that he would come, tonight, tomorrow, in joy or sorrow. He must keep his word. He must come home. For he promised that he would come. His word was given from earth or heaven. He must keep his word and must come home. Go to sleep, my sweet sister Jane. You can slumber who need not number, hour after hour, in doubt and pain. I shall sit here a while and watch, listening, hoping, for one hand groping, in deep shadow to find the latch. After the dark and before the light, one lay sleeping, and one sat weeping, who had watched and wept the weary night. After the night and before the day, one lay sleeping, and one sat weeping, watching, weeping for one away. There came a footstep climbing the stair. Someone standing out on the landing shook the door like a puff of air. Shook the door, and in he passed. Did he enter? In the room's center stood her husband, the door shut fast. "Oh, Robin, but you are cold." chilled with the night dew, so lily-white you, cold like a stray lamb from our fold. O robin, but you are late. Come and sit near me, sit here and cheer me. Lay not down your head on my breast. I cannot hold you, kind wife, nor fold you in the shelter that you love best. Feel not after my clasping hand. I am but a shadow come from the meadow, where many lie, but no tree can stand. We are trees which have shed their leaves, our heads lie low there, but no tears flow there. Only I grieve for my wife who grieves. I could rest if you would not moan. Hour after hour, I have no power to shut my ears where I lie alone. I could rest if you would not cry. But there's no sleeping while you sit weeping, watching, weeping so bitterly. Woe's me, for this I have heard. Oh, night of sorrow, oh, black tomorrow, is it thus that you keep your word? Oh, you who used to shelter me, warm from the least wind, why now the east wind is warmer than you, whom I quake to see? O my husband of flesh and blood, for whom my mother I left, and brother and all I had, accounting it so good. What do you do there underground in the dark hollow? I'm fain to follow. What do you do there? What have you found? What I do there, I must not tell. But I have plenty, kind wife, content ye. It is well with us, it is well. Now we move on to Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe. It was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea, but we loved with a love that was more than love, I and Annabel Lee. With a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this was the reason that long ago, in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabel Lee. That her high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me, to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know, in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of the cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. But our love is stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we, and neither the angels in heaven above nor the demons down under the sea can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee, and the stars never rise but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so, all the night tide, I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in her sepulchre by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. We now have Haunted by Siegfried Sassoon. Evening was in the wood, lowering with the storm. A time of drought had sucked the weedy pool, and baked the channels birds had done with song. Thirst was a dream of fountains in the moon, or willow music blown across the water, leisurely sliding on by weir and mill. Uneasy was the man who wandered, brooding, his face a little whiter than the dusk. A drone of sultry wings flickered in his head. The end of sunset burning through the boughs died in a smear of red. Exhausted hours cumbered, and ugly sorrows hemmed him in. He thought, somewhere there's thunder. As he strove to shake off dread, he dared not look behind him, but stood, the sweat of horror on his face. He blundered down a path, trampling on thistles, in sudden race to leave the ghostly trees. And soon I'll be in open fields, he thought, and half remembered starlight on the meadows, scent of mown grass, and voices of tired men, fading along the field paths, home and sleep, and cool swept upland spaces, whispering leaves, and far off the long churring nightjar's note. But something in the wood, trying to daunt him, led him confused in circles through the thicket. He was forgetting his old wretched folly, and freedom was his need. His throat was choking. Barbed brambles gripped and clawed him round the legs, and he floundered over snags and hidden stumps, mumbling, I will get out. I must get out. Butting and thrusting up the baffling gloom, pausing to listen in a space twixt thorns. He peers around with peering, frantic eyes. An evil creature in the twilight loping, flapped blindly in his face, beating it off. He screeched in terror, and straightway something clambered heavily from an oak and dropped, bent double, to shamble at him, zigzag, squat, and bestial. Headlong he charges down the wood and falls, with roaring brain, agony, the snapped spark, and blots of green and purple in his eyes. Then the slow fingers groping on his neck and at his heart, and strangling clasp of death. Now we have A Child's Nightmare by Robert Graves. Through long nursery nights he stood by my bed unwearying, loomed gigantic, formless, queer, purring in my haunted ear, that same hideous nightmare thing, talking as he lapped my blood, in a voice cruel and flat, saying forever, cat, cat, cat. That one word was all he said, that one word through all my sleep, in monotonous mock despair. Nonsense may be light as air, but there's nonsense that can keep horror bristling round the head, when a voice cruel and flat says forever, cat, cat, cat. He had faded. He was gone, years ago with nursery land, when he leapt on me again from the clank of a night train, overpowered me foot and head, lapped my blood, while on and on the old voice, cruel and flat, says forever, cat, cat, cat. Morphia drowsed. Again I lay in a crater by high wood. He was there with straddling legs, staring eyes as big as eggs, purring as he lapped my blood, his black bulk darkening the day, with a voice cruel and flat. Cat, 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 he said. Cat, cat. When I'm shot through the heart and head, and there's no choice but to die, the last word I'll hear, no doubt, won't be charge or bomb them out, nor the stretcher-bearer's cry, "Let that body be, he's dead," but a voice, cruel and flat, saying forever, "Cat, cat, cat." The Haunted Oak by Laurence Dunbar. Pray, why are you so bare, so bare? O bough of the old oak tree, and why, when I go through the shade you throw, runs a shudder over me? My leaves were green as the best, I trow, and sap ran free in my veins, but I saw in the moonlight, dim and weird, a guiltless victim's pains. I bent me down to hear his sigh, I shook with his gurgling moan, and I trembled sore when they rode away and left him here alone. They charged him with the old crime, and sent him fast in jail. Oh, why does the dog howl all night long, and why does the night wind wail? He prayed his prayer, and he swore his oath, and he raised his hand to the sky, but the beat of hooves smote on his ear, and the steady tread drew nigh. Who is it rides by night, over the moonlit road? And what is the spur that keeps the pace? What is the galling goad? And now they beat at the prison door. Oh, keeper, do not stay. We are friends of him who you hold within, and we fain would take him away from those who ride fast on our heels with mind to do him wrong. They have no care for his innocence, and the rope they bear is long. They have fooled the jailer with lying words. They have fooled the man with lies. The bolts unbar, the locks are drawn, and the great door open flies. Now they have taken him from the jail, and hard and fast they ride, and the leader laughs low down in his throat as they halt my trunk beside. Oh, the judge, he wore a mask of black, and the doctor one of white, and the minister with his oldest son was curiously bedight. O foolish man, why weep you now? 'Tis but a little space, and the time will come when these shall dread the memory of your face. I feel the rope against my bark, and the weight of him in my grain. I feel in the throe of his final woe the touch of my own last pain. And never more shall leaves come forth on the bough that bears the ban. I am burned with dread, I am dried and dead from the curse of a guiltless man. And ever the judge rides by, and goes to hunt the deer, and ever another rides his soul in the guise of a mortal fear. And ever the man, he rides me hard, and never a night stays he, for I feel his curse as a haunted bow on the trunk of a haunted tree. We move now into The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this, and nothing more." Ah, distinctly, I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently, my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly, your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see, then, what there it is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord and lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door. Perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly grim, and ancient raven wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly. though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door. Bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather, then he fluttered, till I scarcely more than uttered, other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, Nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, Doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of never, nevermore. But the raven, still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then, upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking Nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned in my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining, on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight lowered o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then, methought, the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate, yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil. By that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aidenn it shall clasp a scented maiden whom the angels named Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken, quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting, on the pallid bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. The House of Ghosts, Margaret, Widdemer. The house of ghosts are bright within, aglow and warm and gay. A place my own once loved me in, that is not there by day. My hound lay drowsing on the floor, from sunken graves returned, my folk that I was lonely for, that where the hearth fire burned. There was no lightest echo lost when I undid the door. There was no shadow where I crossed the well-remembered floor. I bent to whisper to my hound, so long he had been dead. He slept no lighter, nor more sound. He did not lift his head. I brushed my father as I came. He did not move or see. I cried upon my mother's name. She did not look at me. Their faces in the firelight bent. They smiled in speaking slow of some old gracious merriment forgotten years ago. I was so changed since they had died. How could they know or guess a voice that plead for love and cried of grief and loneliness? Out from the house of ghosts I fled, lest I should turn and see the child I had been lift her head and stare aghast at me. The Night Wind by Eugene Field. Have you ever heard the wind go, you? It is a pitiful sound to hear. It seems to chill you through and through with a strange and speechless fear. 'Tis the voice of the night that broods outside when folks should be asleep. And many's the time I've cried to the darkness brooding far and wide over the land and the deep. Whom do you want, O lonely night, that you wail the long hours through? And the night would say in its ghostly way, you, you, you. My mother told me long ago, when I was a little lad, that when the night went wailing so, somebody had been bad. And then, when I was snug in bed, whither I had been sent, with the blankets pulled up round my head, I'd think of what my mother'd said, and wonder what boy she meant. And who's been bad today, I'd ask, of the wind that hoarsely blew? And the voice would say in its meaningful way, you, you, you. That this was true, I must allow. You'll not believe it, though. Yes, though I'm quite a model now. I was not always so. And if you doubt which things I say, suppose you make the test. Suppose, when you've been bad some day, and up to bed are sent away, from mother and the rest. Suppose you ask, who has been bad? And then you'll hear what's true, for the wind will moan in its rueful tone. You. The Witch, Mary Elizabeth Coleridge. I have walked a great while over the snow, and I am not tall nor strong. My clothes are wet, and my teeth are set, and the way was hard and long. I have wandered over the fruitful earth, but I never came here before. Oh, lift me over the threshold, and let me in at the door. The cutting wind is a cruel foe, I dare not stand in the blast. My hands are stone, and my voice is a groan, and the worst of death is past. I am but a little maiden still, my little white feet are sore. Oh, lift me over the threshold, and let me in at the door. Her voice was the voice that women have, who plead for their heart's desire. She came, and the quivering flame sunk and died in the fire. It never was lit again on my hearth since I hurried across the floor to lift her over the threshold and let her in at the door. Ghost House by Robert Frost. I dwell in a lonely house I know, that vanished many a summer ago, and left no trace but the cellar walls, and a cellar in which the daylight falls, and the purple-stemmed wild raspberries grow. O'er the ruined fences the grapevines shield. The woods come back to the mowing field. The orchard tree has grown one copse of new wood and old, where the woodpecker chops. The footpath down to the well is healed. I dwell with a strangely aching heart in that vanished abode, there far apart, on that disused and forgotten road that has no dust bath now for the toad. Night comes, the black bats tumble and dart. The whippoorwill is coming out to shout, and hush and cluck and flutter about. I hear him begin far enough away, full many a time to say his say, before he arrives to say it out. It is under the small, dim summer star. I know not who these mute folk are, who share the unlit space with me, those stones out under the low-limbed tree. Doubtless bear names that the mosses mar. They are tireless folk, but slow and sad, though too close keeping are lass and lad, with none among them that ever sings, and yet in view of how many things as sweet companions as might be had. The Shadow on the Stone by Thomas Hardy. I went by the druid stone that broods in the garden, white and lone, and I stopped and looked the shifting shadows that at some moments fall thereon from the tree hard by with a rhythmic swing, and they shaped in my imagining to the shade that a well-known head and shoulders threw there when she was gardening. I thought her behind my back, yea, her long I learned to lack. And I said, I am sure you are standing behind me, though how do you get into this old track? And there was no sound but the fall of a leaf. As a sad response, and to keep down grief, I would not turn my head to discover that there was nothing in my belief. Yet I wanted to look and see that nobody stood at the back of me. But I thought once more, nay, I'll not unvision a shape which somehow there may be. So I went on softly from the glade, and left her behind me throwing her shade, as she were indeed an apparition, my head unturned, lest my dream should fade. The Apparition by John Donne. When by thy scorn, O murderess, I am dead, and thou thinkest thee free from all solicitation from me, then shall my ghost come to thy bed, and thee, vain vestal, in worse arms shall see. Then thy sick taper will begin to wink, and he, whose thou art then been tired before, will, if thou stir or pinch to wake him, think thou call'st for more, and in false sleep will from thee shrink, and then, poor aspen wretch, neglected thou, bathed in a cold quicksilver sweat, wilt lie, a verier ghost than I. What I will say, I will not tell thee now, lest that preserve thee. And since my love is spent, I had rather thou shouldst painfully repent, than my threatenings rest, still innocent. The Hag, Robert Herrick. The hag is astride this night for to ride, the devil and she together, through thick and through thin, now out and then in, though ne'er so foul be the weather. A thorn or a burr she takes for a spur, with a lash of a bramble she rides now, through brakes and through briars, or ditches and mires, she follows the spirit that guides now. No beast for his food dares now range in the wood, but hushed in his lair he lies lurking, while mischiefs by these, on land and on seas, at none of nights are working. The storm will arise and trouble the skies this night, and more for the wonder. The ghost from the tomb, affrighted, shall come, called out by the clap of the thunder. The Corpse by Charles Baudelaire. Remember, my beloved, that thing we met by the roadside on that sweet summer day. There on a grousey couch with pebbles set, a loathsome body lay. The wanton limbs stiff stretched into the air, steaming with exhalations vile and dank, in ruthless cynic fashion had laid bare the swollen side and flank. On this decay the sun shone hot from heaven, as though with chemic heat to broil and burn, and unto nature all that she'd given 100-fold return. The sky smiled down upon the horror there, as on a flower that opens to the day. So awful an infection smote the air, almost you swooned away. The swarming flies hummed on the putrid side, whence poured the maggots in a darkling stream that ran along these tatters of life's pride with a liquescent gleam. and like a wave the maggots rose and fell. The murmuring flies swirled round in busy strife. It seemed as though a vague breath came to swell and multiply with life. The hideous corpse from all this living world, a music as of wind and water ran, or as of grain in rhythmic motion swirled by the swift winnower's fan. And then the vague forms, like a dream, died out, or like some distant scene that slowly falls upon the artist's canvas, that with doubt he only half recalls. A homeless dog behind the boulders lay, and watched us both with angry eyes, forlorn, waiting a chance to come and take away the morsel she had torn. And you, even you, will be like this dear thing, a vile infection man may not endure. Star that I yearn to, sun that lights my spring, oh, passionate and pure. Yes, such will you be, queen of every grace, when the last sacramental words are said, and beneath grass and flowers that lovely face moulders among the dead. Then, O beloved, whisper to the worm that crawls up to devour you with a kiss, that I still guard in memory the dear form of love that comes to this. And now, I'll close us out with a short story by H.P. Lovecraft, titled Cool Air. You ask me to explain why I am afraid of a draught of cool air, why I shiver more than others upon entering a cold room, and seem nauseated and repelled when the chill of evening creeps through the heat of a mild autumn day. There are those who say I respond to cold as others do to a bad odor, and I am the last to deny the impression. What I will do is to relate the most horrible circumstance I have ever encountered, and leave it to you to judge whether or not this forms a suitable explanation of my peculiarity. It is a mistake to fancy that horror is associated inextricably with darkness, silence, solitude. I found it in the glare of mid-afternoon, in the clangor of a metropolis, and in the teeming midst of a shabby and commonplace rooming house, with a prosaic landlady and two stalwart men by my side. In the spring of 1923, I had secured some dreary and unprofitable magazine work in the city of New York, and, being unable to pay any substantial rent, began drifting from one cheap boarding establishment to another, in search of a room which might combine the qualities of decent cleanliness, endurable furnishings, and very reasonable price. It soon developed that I had only a choice between different evils, but after a time, I came upon a house in West 14th Street which disgusted me much less than the others I had sampled. The place was a 4-story mansion of brownstone, dating apparently from the late 40s and fitted with woodwork and marble, whose stained and sullied splendor argued a descent from high levels of tasteful opulence. In the rooms, large and lofty, and decorated with impossible paper and ridiculously ornate stucco cornices, there lingered a depressing mustiness and hint of obscure cookery. But the floors were clean, the linen tolerably regular, and the hot water not too often cold or turned off, so that I came to regard it as at least a bearable place to hibernate till one might really live again. The landlady, a slatternly, almost bearded woman named Herrero, did not annoy me with gossip or with criticisms of the late burning electric light in my third-floor front hall room. And my fellow lodgers were as quiet and uncommunicative as one might desire. Only the din of streetcars in the thoroughfare below proved a serious annoyance. I had been there about 3 weeks when the first odd incident occurred. One evening, at about 8, I heard a spattering on the floor and became suddenly aware that I had been smelling the pungent odor of ammonia for some time. Looking about, I saw that the ceiling was wet and dripping, the soaking apparently proceeding from a corner of the site toward the street. Anxious to stop the matter at its source, I hastened to the basement to tell the landlady, and was assured by her that the trouble would quickly be set right. "Dr. Munoz!" she cried as she rushed upstairs ahead of me. "He has spilled his chemicals. He is too sick to doctor himself, sicker and sicker all the time, but he will not have any other for help. He is very queer in his sickness. All day he takes funny smelling baths, and he cannot get excited or warm. All his housework he does himself. His little room is filled with bottles and machines, and he does not work as a doctor. But he was great once. My father in Barcelona has heard of him, and only just now he fixed the arm of the plumber. He never goes out, only on the roof, and my boy Esteban brings him his food and laundry and medicines and chemicals. My God, the sal ammoniac that man uses for keeping himself cool." Mrs. Herrero disappeared up the staircase to the 4th floor, and I returned to my room. The ammonia ceased to drip, and as I cleaned up what had spilled and opened the window for air, I heard the landlady's heavy footsteps above me. Dr. Munoz I had never heard, save for the certain sounds as of some gasoline-driven mechanism, since his step was soft and gentle. I wondered for a moment what the strange affliction of this man might be, and whether his obstinate refusal of outside aid were not the result of a rather baseless eccentricity. There is, I reflected tritely, an infinite deal of pathos in the state of an eminent person who has come down in the world. I might never have known Dr. Munoz had it not been for the heart attack that suddenly seized me one forenoon as I sat writing in my room. Physicians had told me of the danger of those spells, and I knew there was no time to be lost. So, remembering what the landlady had said about the invalid's help of the injured workman, I dragged myself upstairs and knocked feebly at the door above mine. My knock was answered by a curious voice, some distance to the right, asking my name and business. And these things being stated, there came an opening of the door next to the one I had sought. A rush of cool air greeted me, and though the day was one of the hottest of late June, I shivered as I crossed the threshold into a large apartment whose rich and tasteful decoration surprised me in this nest of squalor and seediness. A folding couch now filled its diurnal role of sofa, and the mahogany furniture, sumptuous hangings, old paintings, and mellow bookshelves all bespoke a gentleman's study rather than a boarding-house bedroom. I now saw that the hall room above mine, the little room of bottles and machines which Mrs. Herrero had mentioned, was merely the laboratory of the doctor. and that his main living quarters lay in the spacious adjoining room, whose convenient alcoves and large contiguous bathroom permitted him to hide all dressers and obtrusive utilitarian devices. Dr. Munoz, most certainly, was a man of birth, cultivation, and discrimination. The figure before me was short but exquisitely proportioned, and clad in somewhat formal dress, of perfect cut and fit. A face of masterful, though not arrogant, expression was adorned by a short, iron-gray beard, and an old-fashioned pince-nez shielded the full, dark eyes and surmounted an aquiline nose, which gave a Moorish touch to a physiognomy otherwise dominantly Celtiberian. Thick, well-trimmed hair that argued the punctual calls of a barber was parted gracefully above a high forehead. And the whole picture was one of striking intelligence and superior blood and breeding. Nevertheless, as I saw Dr. Munoz in that blast of cool air, I felt a repugnance which nothing in his aspect could justify. Only his lividly inclined complexion and coldness of touch could have afforded a physical basis for this feeling. And even these things should have been excusable, considering the man's known invalidism. It might, too, have been the singular cold that alienated me, for such chillness was abnormal on so hot a day, and the abnormal always excites aversion, distrust, and fear. But repugnance was soon forgotten in admiration, for the strange physician's extreme skill at once became manifest, despite the ice-coldness and shakiness of his bloodless-looking hands. He clearly understood my needs at a glance and ministered to them with a master's deftness, the while reassuring me in a finely modulated, though oddly hollow and timbreless voice, that he was the bitterest of sworn enemies to death, and had sunk his fortune and lost all his friends in a lifetime of bizarre experiment, devoted to its bafflement and extirpation. Something of the benevolent fanatic seemed to reside in him, and he rambled on almost garrulously as he sounded my chest and mixed a suitable draught of drugs fetched from the smaller laboratory room. Evidently, he found the society of a well-born man a rare novelty in this dingy environment, and was moved to unaccustomed speech as memories of better days surged over him. His voice, if queer, was at least soothing, and I could not even perceive that he breathed as the fluent sentences rolled urbanely out. He sought to distract my mind from my own seizure by speaking of his theories and experiments, and I remember his tactfully consoling me about my weak heart by insisting that will and consciousness are stronger than organic life itself, so that, if a bodily frame be but originally healthy and carefully preserved, it may, through a scientific enhancement of these qualities, retain a kind of nervous animation, despite the most serious impairments, defects, or even absences in the battery of specific organs. He might, he half jestingly said, someday teach me to live, or at least to possess some kind of conscious existence, without any heart at all. For his part, he was afflicted with a complication of maladies requiring a very exact regimen which included constant cold. Any marked rise in temperature might, if prolonged, affect him fatally, and the frigidity of his habitation, some 55 or 56 degrees Fahrenheit, was maintained by an absorption system of ammonia cooling, the gasoline engine of whose pumps I had often heard in my room below. Relieved of my seizure in a marvelously short while, I left the shivery place a disciple and devotee of the gifted recluse. After that, I paid him frequent overcoated calls, listening while he told of secret researches and almost ghastly results, and trembling a bit while I examined the unconventional and astonishingly ancient volumes on his shelves. I was eventually, I may add, almost cured of my disease for all time by his skillful ministrations. It seems that he did not scorn the incantations of the medievalists, since he believed these cryptic formulae to contain rare psychological stimuli which might conceivably have singular effects on the substance of a nervous system from which organic pulsations had fled. I was touched by his account of the aged Dr. Torres of Valencia, who had shared his earlier experiments with him through the great illness of 18 years before, whence his present disorders proceeded. No sooner had the venerable practitioner saved his colleague than he himself succumbed to the grim enemy he had fought. Perhaps the strain had been too great, for Dr. Munoz made it whisperingly clear, though not in detail, that the methods of healing had been most extraordinary, involving scenes and processes not welcomed by elderly and conservative Galens. As the weeks passed, I observed with regret my new friend was indeed slowly but unmistakably losing ground physically, as Mrs. Herrero had suggested. The livid aspect of his countenance was intensified. His voice became more hollow and indistinct. His muscular motions were less perfectly coordinated, and his mind and will displayed less resilience and initiative. Of this sad change, he seemed by no means unaware, and little by little, his expression and conversation both took on a gruesome irony, which restored in me something of the subtle repulsion I had originally felt. He developed strange caprices, acquiring a fondness for exotic spices and Egyptian incense till his room smelled like the vault of a sepulchred pharaoh in the Valley of Kings. At the same time, his demands for cold air increased, and with my aid, he amplified the ammonia piping of his room and modified the pumps and feed of his refrigerating machine till he could keep the temperature as low as 34 or 40, and finally, even 28 degrees. The bathroom and laboratory, of course, being less chilled, in order that water might not freeze and that chemical processes might not be impeded. The tenant adjoining him complained of the icy air from around the connecting door, so I helped him fit heavy hangings to obviate the difficulty. A kind of growing horror of outre and morbid cast seemed to possess him. He talked of death incessantly, but laughed hollowly when such things as burial or funeral arrangements were gently suggested. All in all, he became a disconcerting and even gruesome companion. Yet, in my gratitude for his healing, I could not well abandon him to the strangers around him, and was careful to dust his room and attend to his needs each day, muffled in a heavy ulster which I bought especially for the purpose. I likewise did much of his shopping and gasped in bafflement at some of the chemicals he ordered from druggists and laboratory supply houses. An increasing and unexplained atmosphere of panic seemed to rise around his apartment. The whole house, as I have said, had a musty odor, but the smell in his room was worse, and in spite of all the spices and incense and the pungent chemicals of the now incessant baths which he insisted on taking unaided. I perceived that it must be connected with his ailment, and shuddered when I reflected on what that ailment might be. Mrs. Herrero crossed herself when she looked at him, and gave him up unreservedly to me, not even letting her son Esteban continue to run errands for him. When I suggested other physicians, the sufferer would fly into as much of a rage as he seemed to dare entertain. He evidently feared the physical effect of violent emotion, yet his will and driving force waxed rather than waned, and he refused to be confined to his bed. The lassitude of his earlier ill days gave place to a return of his fiery purpose, so that he seemed about to hurl defiance at the death demon, even as that ancient enemy seized him. The pretense of eating, always curiously like a formality with him, he virtually abandoned, and mental power alone appeared to keep him from total collapse. He acquired a habit of writing long documents of some sort, which he carefully sealed and filled with injunctions that I transmit them after his death to certain persons whom he named. For the most part, lettered East Indians, but including a once celebrated French physician now generally thought dead, and about whom the most inconceivable things had been whispered. As it happened, I burned all these papers undelivered and unopened. His aspect and voice became utterly frightful, and his presence almost unbearable. One September day, an unexpected glimpse of him induced an epileptic fit in a man who had come to repair his electric desk lamp, a fit for which he prescribed effectively whilst keeping himself well out of sight. That man, oddly enough, had been through the terrors of the Great War without having incurred any fright so thorough. Then, in the middle of October, the horror of horrors came with stupefying suddenness. One night, about 11, the pump of the refrigerating machine broke down, so that within 3 hours, the process of ammonia cooling became impossible. Dr. Munoz summoned me by thumping on the floor, and I worked desperately to repair the injury while my host cursed in a tone whose lifeless, rattling hollowness surpassed description. My amateur efforts, however, proved of no use, and when I had brought in a mechanic from a neighboring all-night garage, we learned that nothing could be done till morning, when a new piston would have to be obtained. The moribund hermit's rage and fear, swelling to grotesque proportions, seemed likely to shatter what remained of his failing physique, and once a spasm caused him to clasp his hands to his eyes and rush into the bathroom. He groped his way out with face tightly bandaged, and I never saw his eyes again. The frigidity of the apartment was now sensibly diminishing, and at about 5 a.m., the doctor retired to the bathroom, commanding me to keep him supplied with all the ice I could obtain at all-night drugstores and cafeterias. As I would return from my sometimes discouraging trips and lay my spoils before the closed bathroom door, I could hear a restless splashing within, and a thick voice croaking out the order for more. More! At length, a warm day broke, and the shops opened one by one. I asked Esteban either to help with the ice fetching whilst I obtained the pump piston, or to order the piston while I continued with the ice. But, instructed by his mother, he absolutely refused. Finally, I hired a seedy-looking loafer whom I encountered on the corner of 8th Avenue to keep the patient supplied with ice from a little shop where I introduced him, and applied myself diligently to the task of finding a pump piston and engaging workmen competent to install it. The task seemed interminable, and I raged almost as violently as the hermit when I saw the hours slipping by in a breathless, foodless round of vain telephoning and a hectic quest from place to place, hither and thither by subway and surface car. About noon, I encountered a suitable supply house far downtown, and at approximately 1:30 p.m., arrived at my boarding place with the necessary paraphernalia and 2 sturdy and intelligent mechanics. I had done all I could, and hoped it was in time. Black terror, however, had preceded me. The house was in utter turmoil, and above the chatter of odd voices, I heard a man praying in a deep basso. Fiendish things were in the air, and lodgers tolled over the beads of their rosaries as they caught the odor from beneath the doctor's closed door. The lounger I had hired, it seems, fled screaming and mad-eyed not long after his second delivery of ice, perhaps as a result of excessive curiosity. He could not, of course, have locked the door behind him, yet it was now fastened, presumably from the inside. There was no sound within save a nameless sort of slow, thick dripping. Briefly consulting with Mrs. Herrero and the workmen, despite a fear that gnawed my inmost soul, I advised the breaking down of the door, but the landlady found a way to turn the key from the outside with some wire device. We had previously opened the doors of all the other rooms on that hall and flung all the windows to the very top. Now, noses protected by handkerchiefs, we tremblingly invaded the accursed south room, which blazed with the warm sun of early afternoon. A kind of dark, slimy trail led from the open bathroom door to the hall, and thence to the desk, where a terrible little pool had accumulated. Something was scrawled there in pencil, in an awful, blind hand, on a piece of paper hideously smeared, as though by the very claws that traced the hurried last words. Then the trail led to the couch, and ended unutterably. What was, or had been, on the couch, I cannot and dare not say here. But this is what I shiveringly puzzled out on the stickily smeared paper before I drew a match and burned it to a crisp. What I puzzled out in terror as the landlady and the 2 mechanics rushed frantically from that hellish place to babble their incoherent stories at the nearest police station. The nauseous words seemed well nigh incredible in that yellow sunlight, with the clatter of cars and motor trucks ascending clamorously from crowded 14th Street. Yet I confess that I believed them. Whether I believe them now, I honestly do not know. There are things about which it is better not to speculate, and all that I can say is that I hate the smell of ammonia and grow faint at the draft of unusually cold air. The end, ran that noisome scrawl, is here. No more ice. The man looked and ran away, warmer every minute, and the tissues can't last. I fancy you know what I said about the will and the nerves and the preserved body after the organs ceased to work. It was good theory, but couldn't keep up indefinitely. There was a gradual deterioration I had not foreseen. Dr. Torres knew, but the shock killed him. He couldn't stand what he had to do. He had to get me in a strange, dark place when he minded my letter and nursed me back. And the organs never would work again. It had to be done my way. Artificial preservation, you see. For you see, I died that time 18 years ago. Thank you for joining us on Living Pages. I look forward to seeing you next time. Stay safe out there.